Hello, everybody, and welcome to this theater talk for the Wanderers. My name is Jason Jacobs, and I'm a teaching artist with Roundabout Theater Company.
I'm Ashley St. Juliet, and I'm also a teaching artist at Roundabout Theater Company, and we are so excited to be here to talk about this play, The Wanderers. So let's get into it. The Wanderers is written by Brooklyn-based playwright Anna Ziegler, who also wrote Photograph 51, Actually, The Last Match, which Roundabout produced in 2017.
And it's directed by Barry Edelstein. He's the artistic director at the Old Globe Theater in San Diego. He directed the world premiere of this play at the Old Globe in 2018. But the last time he was at Roundabout was our 1997 revival of All My Sons.
Okay, 90s, well, we're happy to bring you back into the fold of the 2000s. Welcome. So, The Wanderers is about two couples, each going through their own journey in their Jewish faith and their own conflicts.
You know, one of the things that I think is really helpful to know about the play is that one of those couples belongs to the Satmar community.
Okay.
This is a very orthodox sect of the Jewish community. The Satmar people have very strict customs in how they relate to the modern world, and that impacts how gender roles are expressed, how they dress, and what they learn in school.
And to authentically represent this community, the creative team brought on cultural consultant Lili Rosen. A cultural consultant is someone who, from that community, who represents that community to work with the artistic team to ensure that we are telling authentic, nuanced, and multidimensional stories. So we had an opportunity to chat with Lili about the process and her own work. Lili Rosen is a trans writer, actor, producer, and cultural consultant from a Yiddish-speaking home in Hasidic Brooklyn. She is the past managing director of New Yiddish Rep, a role in which she translated, produced, and appeared in numerous productions. Her TV and film credits include the Emmy-winning Unorthodox and Amazon's Undone, to name a few. Lili, thank you so much for being here. We're so happy to have you. And first, I want to start talking about your capacity as a cultural consultant. Tell us, what do you do?
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. As a cultural consultant, I'm asked to weigh in on all of the cultural elements of a production, specifically, usually matters involving the traditional Jewish community or the Hasidic community, to be specific. And that could involve every single element of production, from actually writing the story itself to art, set design, wardrobe, casting, and of course the staging of the piece itself.
Right.
You know, that's always kind of a little bit of a delicate dance, but it's an important one and one that I like to do. And it's especially important when the story that you're telling is three-dimensional. The characters are three-dimensional. And you're portraying these characters as you should, very specifically, and with all their warts and flaws and shortcomings as humans. And when you do that, especially with certain communities, certain underrepresented, or should we say under-portrayed communities,
Right.
There is this sense of, oh, they're trying to criticize us, they're trying to attack us, they're trying to make us look bad. Which of course is not the intent. It's, in my experience, never the intent. The intent is actually to tell these stories and portray these people as they truly are, and to humanize them, and to make them relatable, and to make them universal characters that we can actually identify with, and find parallels in our own lives. And so when you do that and you kind of shine a light on these people's lives, and you kind of call attention to the more difficult moments of their lives and the more challenging aspects of that culture, they're already sensitive to what you're going to say. So if you kind of get the little things wrong and you misrepresent the basic aspects of their culture, the basic aspects of their religion, you lose all credibility. And so when you're actually trying to call attention to something or challenge something, you've already lost your credibility. So not only are you possibly offending people within that community, they're not listening to what you have to say.
So we'd love to know a little bit more about you, and particularly, like, how does your background prepare you to work on this play in particular, The Wanderers?
So The Wanderers is set in Hasidic Williamsburg, of course, in the Satmar community. And the Satmar community originates in what is now actually modern-day Romania, but for most of the early part of the 20th century, it was actually part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It was part of Hungary. And my parents are from the very same region in Hungary that these protagonists originated from as well.
Oh, wow.
You know, I grew up in a kind of neighboring community in Brooklyn with many of the same people, many of the same characters. Even though we were never kind of card-carrying members of the Satmar community, we were heavily affiliated with them. And our own little cultural environment was heavily influenced by it. You know, I considered myself a follower of the Satmar Rebbe for much of my childhood. You know, my father has a picture of him in his study. I was at his funeral. I was literally 6 weeks old when the late Satmar Rebbe passed. You know, I was raised within that Hasidic environment, and it took me a very long time to kind of find myself. But I did eventually leave the Hasidic community, and but I still try to maintain some connection and cultural ties, whether it's through my family or through friends from that community. And of course, the influence, it's something that you never really lose. It's something that never really leaves you. You know, it influences and affects my work more than vice versa. So, you know, it's kind of always the question.
Yeah.
Art imitating life or life imitating art. But yes, it's the culture that's, you know, kind of doing the consulting on me more than the other way around. I did eventually make my way to Yiddish theater and found a way to kind of tie my past to my present, and kind of found this artistic outlet for my cultural heritage, and try to find a way to kind of reconcile that with the person I was becoming. You know, people often ask me, why is it important to you? And it's interesting because growing up in the Hasidic community, we had very little exposure to other communities other than our own.
Right.
Whether it was kind of, you know, white America or other marginalized communities around us, of which there were always many, we had almost no exposure to them. And some of it, you know, was circumstantial, but a lot of it was also intentional, right? To maintain kind of the insularity, to maintain the kind of authenticity and the cohesiveness of the community. You know, we built kind of the walls of our own ghetto to keep out outside influences. And one way in which we did that was to pretty much ban consumption of popular culture. As a teenager, I somehow managed to get my hands on a TV, and I would spend hours every night watching TV while my parents were asleep. And that is how I learned about the world around me. And some of it was really bad, like TV. Some of it was better.
Yeah.
But I kind of consumed all this and innocently thought that everything I saw on TV was gospel, was the truth, was an accurate representation of these communities, whether it was Westerns
Right.
about Native Americans or any other community. And I was fascinated and I loved it. And then one day, I see a movie called A Stranger Among Us with, I want to say, Melanie Griffith.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's set,
Yes.
it's actually set on, the story takes place on 47th Street. She plays this cop, this homicide detective who's investigating the murder of a Hasidic diamond dealer on 47th Street. And she then goes undercover into the sophomore community in Williamsburg.
Okay.
And this is one of the earliest portrayals in modern media that I know of the sophomore community. And I'm watching this, and I don't recognize the community. I don't recognize the characters. I don't recognize the language. It's all over the place. It's awful.
Right.
It's laughably bad. And I was so disheartened because then I realized that if they got this so wrong, how can I trust anything else
Right.
that I'm consuming? But that was the first time I had the sense that representation matters.
Right. So I'm curious, because you have that background, you have that nuance after watching these things not sort of live up to the realities of these communities. What's your role in those rehearsal spaces in relation to the actors, the directors, or the writers? How are you operating in that space?
You know, often the heads of the department will kind of set the tone,
Okay.
and I try to defer to them. But at the same time, I hope that they defer to me in matters of actual like cultural specificity, and they usually do,
Okay.
which is really, really great. I think that the industry has come very far when it comes to kind of letting us tell our own stories and not trying to colonize our stories. I mean, obviously we have a long way to go in that regard,
Right.
but it's definitely come very far. I mean, the fact that I have work
Yeah.
speaks to that. And, you know, of course, I've worked on shows where, you know, one great example I think is Apple TV has a show called Little America, in which every episode portrays a different marginalized community. And every episode has a cultural consultant that's hired for that episode specifically. So there were kind of several cultural layers involved. And so we had several cultural consultants working together on that show to ensure that every culture was being portrayed correctly.
So I just want to shift a little bit to all the other things you do. You act, you write, you produce. And I know one of the things that I'm finding really interesting about The Wanderers, particularly about Abe's character, is this question of like, how does our identity inform our artistry? And so I want to ask you that question. Like, how do you feel your identity or your multiple identities feed into the work you create?
I think what makes artists artists is that we're human, we're living, we're breathing, and we bring our own perspective and our own lived experience to the work that we do. If otherwise we would just be AI, right? True. And we've all seen AI art. It wouldn't be art. So I definitely bring my different identities to all the work that I do. Just to cite one example, and this is a fun one. I recently I produced and acted in a Yiddish language feature called Shtetl. It's a Ukrainian film that was filmed in Ukraine and on location. And we built an entire set, an entire Yiddish shtetl. Shtetl is Yiddish for a small village. I was actually cast for this before I came out, before I started like medically transitioning. And so I was cast to play a rabbi in this, as you do. And like I show up to set in Femme, go into hair and makeup, spend 3 hours putting this ridiculous beard on, and then play this rabbi. And as an actor, your character has a secret that kind of drives that character and motivates that character.
Yeah.
And guess what my character's secret was? I mean, I definitely love playing with my identities and my past and kind of trying to marry the two.
Great. It's fascinating.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you so much for your insight. I feel learned. I feel like I have insight now myself and, how to, be culturally responsive in my own world and in my own communities, right?
And now you know how to stay shtetl.
I'm learning. I don't want to go for it because I don't know if I can do it. But thank you so much, Lili. Thank you for being here and for sharing your perspective.
This was so much fun. Thank you for having me and for listening to me ramble on and on about myself.
I love it. Thank you.